Okay, so now let's take a look at self, group and peer assessment with our learners. We can really use assessment to help our learners become responsible for their own learning process. We've already looked at assessment for learning and assessment as learning, and this would form part of assessment as learning. So the benefits of peer assessment. We often talk now about collaborative learning, cooperative learning, but really, what does that mean, and what can we take away with it in terms of assessment and in terms of assessment as learning and helping our learners learn and understand their learning process? Well, peer assessment obviously is the process of when each of our group or the class in general take it in terms to evaluate our work. Now, this is a process that will need an introduction and it will need explaining, and it's normally, especially if you're working with children, you can get classes where it can go negative. So we really need, what we're going to look at in a minute, we're going to look at techniques to make sure that we stay in a constructive atmosphere and avoid that slide into a negative atmosphere, especially when somebody's work wasn't very good, that we have to evaluate, and the class is evaluating somebody's work that really wasn't the best they could have done. And so we need to strive for that positive note, really to keep encouraging them, just like we looked at in the previous video. So here we're really encouraging the fact that when you know you have to evaluate a peer, if they're doing a presentation, let's imagine that we have a small group of three learners, and they're doing some kind of presentation on something that they prepared, and everybody else is listening. Well, it's very easy to switch off. When the audience know that they're going to be evaluating, they know they're going to have to give feedback, then it encourages them to be switched on. So this is something we need to tell them beforehand, and it's a good mechanism to ensure attention, to ensure that they maintain their attention throughout the presentation, and also really encourage note-taking. Note-taking is very much a skill, but it does encourage concentration, and it also encourages, it helps them to remember when they want to give the feedback what they actually heard, and what they liked and what they would like to see improved. I think peer assessment is also very useful for student accountability, because when you know that you're going to be peer assessed, you do make that extra effort to do it well, okay? You're being, let's say, judged by your peers, although this would normally happen in many cases even if we weren't actually doing peer assessment. But you do go that extra mile to improve it. But as I say, in a constructive atmosphere, as we will look at in a minute. It encourages active listening, as we said, because it encourages concentration, it encourages listening, and encourages them to keep their attention on the speaker, which is something that when the speaker is speaking in their foreign language, possibly halting, it's not that easy always to listen to and understand everything. And of course, the people listening have also got a lower, possibly, I mean, we might be talking about very proficient students in English, but often it's students that are lower proficiency in listening and speaking and in communicative skills generally. And therefore, the person speaking has difficulty producing. The people listening also have difficulty to understand what they're hearing. So this does encourage that extra process and extra effort. Something that's very important here is that it encourages analytical skills. These are obviously higher order thinking skills, as we will look at in later units. But analytical skills and critical thinking are really something we want to encourage in our students, that we're not just memorizing text, we're actually thinking about and evaluating what it is that we're looking at and hearing. And I think that's a very important skill we need to encourage in our learners. When we are obviously assessing, we are applying criteria, and each criterion we've looked at previously. I mean, we can use it with criteria, or we can actually just give our opinion. That's another way we can possibly mark it with a rubric. We can actually give all of the people listening rubrics, or go over maybe on the board previously, what is it we think is important in this presentation, and I want you to evaluate it according to this criteria. And so they're actually learning about the rubric that's being used, actually using the rubric, and that really helps them understand how the teacher then uses a rubric and how the teacher produces a grade. So that's, again, very important as in assessment as learning. And as we mentioned, it's tact. We want to be active, constructive, as we looked at in the previous video. So the learners have to, the audience have to learn how to use tact and speak carefully to avoid obviously hurting people's feelings. Okay, so now let's look at how we can achieve this constructive feedback, as we said we wanted to actually achieve. And I think that the technique of 2 stars and a wish is really ideal for this. Because you've got 2 positive things. You're telling your learners to look for 2 positive things, 2 things that you thought were really deserving of some merit and some recognition, and 1 thing that we think could be improved, not that you think is bad. Okay, we want to phrase it, and this is a process, a learning process that we need to guide our learners through. But it's how to rephrase it as, you didn't do that very well, as in, I think you could have boom, boom, boom. And then it really helps the learner understand in an encouraging way. I mean, the information is the same. I mean, really, basically imagine that somebody, let's say somebody didn't practice, and that they're just, you know, that they forget their lines, they forget what they want to say. Not that it should be lines, but it should be spontaneous, but they really didn't know what they wanted to say, and they hadn't practiced. So instead of saying, I didn't like it because you didn't practice, or I could tell you didn't practice, as in, maybe next time you could look at it and you could practice a little bit more beforehand. And then the learners actually got some advice. They know how to apply it, because one thing is, when you get the information, it's you didn't practice, it's just stating, okay, well, the person didn't practice. Maybe they know that, and maybe it's the truth. But it's not actually helping them improve for the next time. Whereas if you turn around, if the learners turn around and say, next time, maybe you could practice more, or practice beforehand, and then the learner actually knows how to apply that problem in a way that they can improve it for the future, which is where we want to go, because that's assessment as learning, helping us improve our learning process. Another way, obviously, is looking at that self-assessment. And I think especially with younger children and with lower levels, the use of emoticons and also of the hand, of the great, the so-so and the not so great, this can help them. This is what they apply. So the not so great is obviously how they see themselves. So when you give them a question, a specific question, and it could be about whether they're enjoying the unit, it could be whether they understand it, it could be about how comfortable they are with the material, however you want to focus it, however you want to learn their feedback, and you want to get their feedback from. And I think this is a way that young children can really understand it. I mean, everybody knows emoticons and emojis, so I think it's very easy to use. Another way also is at the end of the class, just go, okay, everybody put your hands up, great, what did you think, dum, 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 just tell me how you are with the unit, tell me how it went. Okay, very quick way, you just scan the room and you just see how many fingers are like that, how many thumbs are like that, how many like that, and how many like that. And it gives you just a very quick thermometer of the feeling of the room in terms of learning. And it helps you, therefore, this is the feedback that we want that helps us adjust our teaching for the next class. Another way are exit slips. Now, exit slips are really, really useful, and they can be used in the forms of like a quick post-it, like this, or they can be used in the way of, for example, an exit card where you actually prepare it and you actually have a pre-prepared card. This again is using emojis and emoticons, so that it's very easy to understand with minimum amount of language, very visual, and they quickly just jot down or circle the emoticon or emoji that applies to them, and then they can write a quick note of observation. Now, exit slips are a very quick thing. It's when you want to gauge the temperature of learning, what's going on, how are people feeling about this. You can focus it very much on a question for learning, as in, imagine you're going into a new aspect of content, or a new grammar point, or a new vocabulary, or maybe doing creative writing and you want to see how they are with the story they're creating, or maybe you're reading a book with them and you just want to check how's the understanding for this book, for their reading comprehension skills, and it really helps you do that. So give a very focused question. This is a 30-second, 1-minute activity. Write it down. It might take longer for the very first time, but like everything, it's a learning curve. Once you use it in class frequently, it's really, really, really quick. You just hand it out. Maybe, I mean, they could even have them ready. I mean, they could have like a bunch of that you've prepared, and every student has one, and it's like, okay, grab an exit slip. You write the question on the board. Okay, what do you think? Or you just tell them the question. If you write it on the board, especially if you're talking about lower levels, so they have that guidance, that visual guidance on the board, that prop. Write down the answer, and you can adjust your learning. So again, this is the two-way feedback that we mentioned in the previous video. And so I really hope these techniques help you improve your skills and improve your assessment as learning within the class, and your self-group and peer assessment with your learners. And thank you for watching.